I got to college, that's when the calculator came out, which saved my life.
Hey, you know what? We're breaking up. I don't know if my I gotta check if my hang on.
What was that?
I gotta check if my okay. All right. So our Wi-Fi, we're in the process of changing our iOS system, and my computer doesn't have a camera or a microphone. I got the oldest computer in the office because all I do is write customer service complaints, letters, and that kind of stuff, legal stuff. I don't work on all of the E20 programs or anything like that. So I got the only single screen computer in the whole office. Everybody else got dual or tri screens.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, tell me about yourself. Give me some of your background.
Well, I went to public school. As I mentioned, I'm 78 years old. I went to, I grew up in Manoa Valley. Back, can I just repeat all the stuff you saw in
Sure,
my
sure.
text? Yeah, I grew up where it was just taro patches and cattle farms. And we had the military housing. Like, where did you grow up?
I was born in LA. My parents
Oh,
were from here. And then we moved over when I was about 13. And it was in Halava Heights. I grew up in
okay.
Halava Heights.
Well, if you notice in Manoa and Palolo Valley, there was the military relocation camps. They were all strips of housing units. After the World War, they brought all the soldiers back and they needed a place for temporary housing until they could finally move into a place of their own. So, if you're familiar with Manoa, the entire area where Manoa Shopping Center is,
Uh-huh.
east of that, Noelani School, the Astronomy School, the Innovation Center, all the way up, past to Woodlawn Drive, Kahaloa Drive, was all housing. So that's what it was like in Manoa. And I went to Manoa Elementary, Stevenson, Roosevelt. And I graduated from Roosevelt High School, 1964. And it was just in my senior year. And my counselor called me in, and I was kind of frightened that I was getting called in for some kind of delinquency. That's the only time you get called in public school. And Miss Becker asked me, and she says, what are you going to do after high school? And I says, I'm going to go to Honolulu Technical College and become an auto mechanic. And she kind of flipped her lid and she says, well, how come you're taking all this advanced science and math classes? And I said, I don't know. I just followed my friends, and all of them, they were going to go to university and colleges like that.
Mm.
And I was kind of a borderline kid. I was into automobile racing and that kind of stuff. And I really didn't know that much about cars like the rest of my friends. And this is why I wanted to get into automotive school. So she convinced me to go into engineering. And she said, this is the date of the exam. Go sign up and go take the exam. I got in and that's how I started at the University of Hawaii. It was an overwhelming experience. The campus was huge, a lot of students, uh, all the humanities classes that we had to take that really I struggled with because it just wasn't of interest to me, and of course the fear of failing, right? Failing out of your first year. But after I got into my second year and we started getting into the core classes, mechanical engineering and that kind of stuff, it wasn't school anymore. I just enjoyed every class I took. I just my classmates and I, we just feasted up, and we hung around kind of the guys that were the ranchers in the group. So we would talk about cars and the application of the sciences and this kind of stuff. So the last 2 years was pretty much just sailing along, and I did rather well. And then I my senior year in 1968, the mechanical engineering department finally got its accreditation, and their push now was to encourage the promising engineers to go to grad school. And so Dr. Burgess, he was around when you were there, right? He was the
Yeah,
chairman.
yeah. I actually went to high school with his son.
Yeah. He encouraged me to go to graduate school instead of go to work. I said I was just going to go to work. And just about the time the Vietnam War was getting pretty heavy, but he told me to apply, and he recommended I apply to Stanford. So I thought
Ooh.
I got a full fellowship to Stanford, and I explained to you that I turned it down because the lottery number was too low. You know, I was 47 out of 365. Meaning that's how the priority they're going to pull kids out of to the draft. I also got into Cornell because in my senior year, this Dr. George Dubois, he was the sabbatical professor at the university out of Cornell, and he was teaching us applied mechanics, which is totally everything automobile, suspension, dampening, compression, bearings, lubrication, everything you could think of, gear ratios. And I really ate the class up. And he said, you know, you're the most, he just told me, he says, I don't know, you're the only student that really looks forward to my class and all this kind of stuff. He says, what are you going to go to do after school? And I said, well, I got an offer to go to Stanford. He said, why don't you come to Cornell? Understudy with me. He says, I'd like you to have you as graduate school. And I ended up turning that down because my parents were only 8th grade educated. You know, I mean, second generation from immigrant families. And in the 8th grade, most of us they went to work. So my father was a mailman, and so he asked me, you know, Cornell is in New York. That's too far. We can't even afford the airfare. You know, we're living in, you know, we were kind of the medium to low class living people and all. And so I told him I turned it down. And so I turned him down, and he was understanding about it. I told him, you know, it was too far, and thank you. And I didn't even know Cornell was Ivy League. That's how dumb I was about education. I just wanted to graduate and go. And then when the lottery came, I had to go in and turn down Dr. Burgess. That didn't go over too well. He was really upset about it. How much time you got? This is kind of, I don't want to get off the line. Anyway, he was really pissed off. And when I went to graduate school at the university on a defense department working in nuclear engineering, he never talked to me or anything. He just kind of cold-shouldered me and ignored me. And then, to make it short, when we started the Dean's Council in 1968, Dr. Che recommended I represent the mechanical engineering outside industry. And so we had cocktail reception for the council members, the professors, and the invited guests. It was up in the second lobby, and I was talking to, you know, Cheryl Nojima? She was the assistant dean at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were talking story because I was close with her because I was, you know, doing things, trying to talk to students in the ASHRAE chapter about going to engineering. And so we're talking, and then Dr. Burgess came up, and I looked at him. He says, hi, I'm John Burgess. I said, I know Dr. Burgess. How are you? He says, oh. So he reintroduced himself, and he says, look, I'm retired now, and I came out of retirement just to be at this reception to apologize to you. And I apologize for the way that I treated you after, you know, you turned down Stanford. I was disappointed, but then I realized today, it's not where you graduated from. It's how well you apply your college education in the business world, and you've done well. So I really want to apologize. I'm sorry. And he left. And she was talking, what was that all about? You know, this is 30 years later. And so that was that was good, you know, that I got realized that afterwards. So I got my defense deferment, and after that, I met Randy Murayama in Pearl Harbor. He stayed there for only like about 2 months, and then he got rifted. And you know, we were active in ASME at the time, and I was getting kind of frustrated because the war was ending, and it was getting to peacetime conditions where, you know, the nuclear work was getting really boring, and paperwork and the bureaucracy. And so I told him, you know, I'd like to try work on the outside sector. So he recommended I work with Giovanni. That's where I started. And the rest is in my bio. Yeah, you got the bio. You know what I mean,
Yeah.
you have the files from Joseph King of all the best.
No, I don't. I don't. So I have to look that up and get that all archived somehow.
Yeah. Well, that kind of explains it from there and my involvement in ASHRAE. But you don't want to be rehash all that stuff, right?
Just how your some of the memories, outstanding memories of the people in ASHRAE, and I guess your involvement in that.
Well, I got involved with ASHRAE because the people who were actually the chartered people in ASHRAE was Giovanni, Boichi, Lester Sen, Jack Lindsay, George Motonaga, Joe Tanaka, and the guys
Fred
that
Koloff.
started. Fred, no, Fred wasn't even in it yet. Fred was part
Oh.
of the SCA. And they were the ones that started ASHRAE as a chapter, and it was the first engineering society where you didn't have to be an engineer to be a member. You could be like SME and all. They kind of frown upon you not being a graduate engineer, but ASHRAE was pretty much just for the industry sake. So when I went to work for Giovanni, the first thing I did was join ASHRAE, and he wanted me to join ASHRAE. And that's how I got involved. And we used to go to ASHRAE meetings a lot. And Richard Kataoka, who I mentioned is one of my mentors, he was a key guy at Giovanni's office. He came from Soderholm and Sorensen, and Giovanni pulled him from there because Giovanni also worked for Soderholm and Sorensen and opened up his own business once he got his license. So I learned a lot from Richard. Richard was probably the best mentor I had in air conditioning. We used to go to ASHRAE meetings together. And we used to be in the 770 Kapiolani building. You know where the Velocity Motors is? The next building over, that ugly looking building. I think it's green. That was our office.
Is it still there?
Yeah, it's still there. They used to have a bar downstairs, Orbit Lounge. And Mike Suzuki, the architect, was part owner of that stuff. So we used to go there.
Hey, John, you're breaking up. Slow down. Can you hear me? You're kind of frozen.
We're using my phone. It's supposed to be working. Okay,
you
just
better
tell me when I'm freezing.
Yeah, you're better now.
So that's how I got into ASHRAE. And then after 2 years, I decided I didn't want to do consulting work anymore. It was just relentless. I think you got some of it right in the beginning. What did you work for before? You worked for MEH all the way?
No, I was with the Navy Public Works Center. And then I went private. I went to Bill Olson and Associates. And I worked for him for like about 3 or 4 years, I think. And then I went to MEH.
Okay, so the consulting, I mean, it's relentless, right? Just one job after another. Keep going,
Multiple.
keep going, yeah. I wasn't getting any gratification. And also there was this, Giovanni had this professional jealousy against engineers, like nobody was smarter than he. He wasn't really the top of the line engineer in my mind. So I decided to just leave. And the excuse was, if my wife got pregnant, he told me, if your wife gets pregnant, you shouldn't work for me because you're not going to be able to put in the time that I require of you. So I used that as an excuse to quit. And he just gave me a big raise. I was running the office, operations manager. And I just said, thanks, Joe, but I won't take the raise. I'll just take the pay that I got. And I'm just telling you that in 6 months, I plan to leave. And he went ballistic. So I left on good graces as best as I could, but he was very vindictive. He took all of American Equipment's catalog out of the office, and he told everybody to throw it away. And he said it right in front of me because he knew I was leaving, right? And he wouldn't let us in his office to update the catalogs or anything, which was fine. He wasn't the biggest player in town. But I just didn't want to leave on a bad note. So I don't know if you remember David Harada. He was a PE also. He was 1 year behind me. And he ended up marrying the barmaids, the, the, the owner of the lady who owned the bar downstairs, he married her daughter. I used to come over there because he knew, he was also a car renter too. So I said, if he can last 2 years at Giovanni's office, he'd be good because he's just going to harass you. Anyway, so anyway, we talked about the long line refrigeration thing at the first guys to do it. Giovanni had the condominium, in Kapalua, and nobody could do the long lines. And the architect was real fussy about refrigerating the condenser noise and everything. So they put all the condensers up at the carports up next to the driveway, and the luxury condos were down on the bottom, facing the ocean, and long lines. And everybody they went to said, no, Train said they cannot do it. Rock couldn't do it. And so I challenged David. I said, I know how to do it. I had just come out of engineering school at Carrier. So my memory was real fresh. And I had talked to several people in Los Angeles, some, the old timers from Carrier, that, kind of started with, and they were telling me some of the tricks of the trade. And he said, oh no, we can do long lines. So I told him I could do it. So David goes back and tells Giovanni he could do it. And so Giovanni, he tells me, if this thing doesn't work, I'm going to sue Carrier's ass. That's what he said. And so I took the challenge and I did it. And I was plumbing what, was a contractor at the time. But I said, I got to be there before you bury the pipe. I got to be there when we start up. I got to be there when we charge the system because I got to add refrigerant oil. And it's so funny. We're using a Pyrex glass, to measure the oil. And I said, this is the additional, and I had to calculate each line length and add refrigerant oil so that the lubrication would be maintained while the thing is operating. And then I had to make sure the trap was in the right place. And so we did that. And Eddie Au himself, the old man, came out because he was thinking like, man, this is really a risky project. And so he came out during the startup and several of the mechanics came out and he said, you sure this isn't going to work? And we finally started it. Everything worked. That's the 5 years. And after that, we did almost all the long line work in Maui and over here. And then when Giovanni was convinced that I helped him out, we became really good friends. And so he nominated me as board of governors. You know how you got to ratchet up to the top, so that I would be the president when the summer meeting occurred in 84, 85. And we did pull off a really good summer meeting. We had all the help we wanted. By that time, ASHRAE was really running high, really full blast. And everybody that I mentioned in the newsletter were really actively involved. They did a lot of the late. All I did was, kind of lead with the flag. And it's just that year is the year Giovanni died. He died in February from the fire in the Philippines. And he never saw the ASHRAE meeting that he wanted.
Yeah. They had all the top guys in town, all the top consultants, all the top contractors. Were all involved.
Oh yeah.
In the sales. We're all involved in ASHRAE at that time.
Yeah, those were good times. And then after I finished my presidency, I tell everybody, it's time to go back into the pasture. So Robert became the subsequent president 5 or 6 years later. And all the other guys like Mark Suzuki, Sam Fujikawa, Cedric followed right after me. And it was kind of disappointing. Cedric didn't really participate in ASHRAE until he became president. Even as president, he wouldn't come to the meetings. But that's okay. We had a good time. We had, and then I became the student chapter chairman for ASHRAE. And we used to give talks and that kind of stuff to the students. But we used to have a lot of good meetings, and we had good talks too. Good people to give. Illinois was our program chairman. What else?
Yeah, that was great educational for the young students. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe you can, advice to young engineers.
Okay, when we were doing, the committee stuff and how to get people interested, first get interested in engineering, first of all, because remember, they didn't have STEM programs or anything like that. And then I ended up doing talks about engineering in the high schools.
Hmm.
And one of the things that came up was that you cannot convince people to go into air conditioning engineer. You can talk to engineers already, but they're pretty much set. The civil, the electrical, and they kind of know where they're going. A lot of them just go to the government, just out of because of the wages that they were offering. They give you at that time when I was working, it was a 10% quota. And Manini now it's what, like 25% or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we were talking about how to get people interested, not so much into air conditioning, just consulting engineering, because there's basically three types of work. There's consulting engineering, there's project engineering, and there's government work. Very few people entertain going into sales. That's even harder to get people to come work for you. And so I went to see Fred, and I said, Fred, how are we going to motivate people to go into consulting engineers? He laughed, and Fred was kind of an arrogant, shoot from the hip, outspoken kind of guy, cantankerous and everything. I mean, he was everybody in one. And by then he had earned my respect, and that's another story, how the things we went through. But he just told me, he says, John, the problem with engineers today, the consultants are just boilerplaters. All they want to do is get out the drawings as fast as they can and cover their butts so they don't violate the code and don't get sued. And the only satisfaction, if you go around and ask, there's really no job satisfaction. So instead of asking people, why don't you go into engineering? I went and asked all these other people, consulting engineers, how do you like engineering? And of the 30 guys I've asked, I think only 2 guys said they liked their jobs. I think Lewis was one of them, and I think Randy Murayama was the other one.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and so everybody says the only gratification we get about being a consultant is no phone calls during the project. And I thought, holy moly, and that's true. And this is why I encourage engineers, like even when we do interviews like that, I say, if you don't have the passion to do what we're doing, you're not going to make it. You got to like what you're doing. And it's not about the money, because an example is, Eric Lum, when he started, he's been with us 20 years already. And he came from thermal engineering. And he just wanted to sell and make money and commission in the beginning, because, money is the driver of everything, right? And so after his first year, he started doing pretty good and he started doing better. And except when there were fuel problems, he didn't know what to do. And so he would come to us. And so when we do annual performance evaluations, performance reviews, and I told him, Eric, I'm just going to tell you this, like every other profession, if you just work for the money, you're going to die. You're going to be frustrated and it's going to kill you. He says, but if you really learn the druthers of our business, like the way Robert and I did, we just wanted to be the best air conditioning engineers. We wanted to have the technical depth that if there was a problem, people would call us for advice. He says, if you get to that level, the work is easy. The commission comes automatically. And slowly over time, he changed. And today he's our top applied engineer. Everybody calls on Eric, and Robert. And they're the 2 most valuable applied people in all different types of application. And believe it or not, he makes more revenue in 1 year than Robert or I. Just because of his commission is so high. Because we also graduate the tiers. Like the higher you sell in 1 month, you jump to a bigger percentage rate, the bigger percentage rate. So he's been hitting the high tier. So he's doing really well, and he's learned to balance his life where, and that's another thing we stress in our company is you got to have the balance of life, right? You guys do that too, I think, at Kaufman, where your family life and your professional life got to be good. I lost you. Hello? I lost you. I don't have audio.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. There was another call coming in.
Okay.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so I mean, so I just tell people if you don't have the passion to do what you're doing, you just work for the money, you'll burn out. And that's what happens to everybody, no matter what profession. Okay. I don't want to keep you on forever.
Oh, no, thanks, John. That was great. Great. Um, any last thoughts about ASHRAE and stuff or involvement in ASHRAE?
I think it's a good it's a good organization because it accepts anybody affiliated with the industry. You know, you can get suppliers, contractors. You don't have to be an engineer. And I think that was one of the biggest things that Giovanni pushed. You didn't have to be an engineer like HSPE or all these other engineering societies. And I think that's one of the greatest strengths. And it's open to everybody that's in the industry. And it's the collaboration, the information sharing uh, that makes the industry strong.
I found that kind of unique about ASHRAE too, is you have the consultants, you have the contractors and the sales guys, and you can you make relationships and you can talk about things, even though you're competitors, but you get to know, like, especially the contractors, when you have a problem, you can build up a trust because of that relationship rather than sitting on the opposite sides of the table, so it's kind of neat that I found out.
And that's one of the reasons why I left consulting. I'm thinking like, why I got to depend on my supplier to tell me about plumbing fixtures and acid waste piping, or a sewage plant guy, because we're doing a lot of portable sewage plants, you know. And I said, if you're going to get to be an expert, you got to go into that field, and that's why I chose air conditioning, because it was still creative. It wasn't tied with plumbing codes and regulations yet. Although ASHRAE is doing a good job regulating it.
That's for sure. Oh, the codes are just, when
Yeah,
we started, the codes was like a thin little book, right?
yeah,
Now you got
right.
volumes of,
Volumes, right. And NFPA has taken on a big chunk of it too.
yeah. Hey,
But a lot
well,
of the,
thank.
the projects that I talked about that went under the radar, uh, that was really stepping out of the box. When we did the Red Hill project, I mean, I don't know if you remember David Wilka. He
Yeah,
was with
yeah.
the cat. Yeah, he looked at me and he just says, "You sure this thing gonna work?" I said, "It's design build." He said, "Yeah, but this is defense critical, you know." I said, "I know, but somebody's got to do it."
He was my branch supervisor because I started at the Naval Public Works Center, and then
Yeah,
he
he
went
was
up to PacDiv.
right.
He was a good
Nice
guy
guy.
though.
Yeah, I remember flying in two air-cooled condensers, 60-ton air-cooled condensers. They had to fly it in because it was priority one, defense, everything. I had to go find a plane that could put it on. We ended up putting up on a 747 cargo plane, just barely fit, like 2 inches on the side. We fly the whole thing in. They pay for the air freight, you know, delivery, everything. The job gets postponed. Typical government,
Sounds
right?
sounds
Yeah,
normal, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh boy, those are. I mean, those you lose sleep over those type of designs and stuff, right?
Let me ask you a question. Why did you leave government and go into private?
You know, it was sort of like what you said about not finding a satisfaction, and I was getting frustrated um because I'm kind of a learner. Um, I mean, it's the people are great. People are great, but I just wasn't for me, and I would get sick all the time and frustrated, and it comes out in your other parts of your life.
Yeah.
So you
Amen.
know, I when I went to consulting, it was like a breath of fresh air. Although it has its own things. I mean, you got to learn a lot, but it was just it was something that was I found much more, you know, preferable. And there's nothing wrong with government jobs. I mean, the lifestyle is great,
There's
but
everything wrong with a government job.
I
You,
didn't
you
want
know,
to
when
do
we
that,
interviewed
honestly.
the engineers, whether they like their jobs or not. The government was the worst lot. All they were worrying about, and these guys were in their late 30s, early 40s. All they were worried about is their high three and their pension, retirement. And you know, oh, waste your whole career doing something you hate only to retire. And I
Yeah,
thought that was really, and the thing that got me, well, I was in nuclear, maybe that's worse, but once the war ended, the morale was so bad. There wasn't no teamwork anymore. Everybody was pointing fingers. The favorite line was, "That's not my job." And everybody has this demarcation. The only and I remember a banker friend of mine in college told me, he says, "What are you going to work for the government?" He says, when you work for a private industry, there's an incentive. You got to make money for your employer. Whereas in the government, you never run out of money. They just increase taxes. And, you get Danny Noy bring more money in to fund the thing. And that was so true. And and that's what I when I got out. I just there's no and then you got all of this. As long as the guy in front of you is in line, his step increase, his promotion, everything. It's like you're in. There's no. You only can jump leapfrog unless you do something really outstanding. To bypass another guy when you get up into the upper tier like 12, 13, and 14.
yeah. I just couldn't see it. I was saying, can I stand? Am I gonna make it 30 years from now?
Yeah,
I couldn't. I I I wasn't gonna make it, you know.
I knew I wasn't going to make it. And
But
then
but
my
there are times that when when I hit 55, I was going, oh, I could have retired, you know. But I said, no, I wouldn't have made it to 55 at that rate.
no, but then you look at these guys that retire. What are they doing now? I mean, this is the thing that I'm struggling with. All my retired friends, unless they get involved with some kind of community service work or volunteer work, it's total boredom. It's total boredom. I know friends that just some of my Pearl Harbor friends, which I'm still close with, all they do is watch Korean soap operas, Major League Baseball, and play golf once a week.
Yeah, yeah.
You remember Ron Katahara, MK Engineers, he's electrical engineering firm.
I don't think I've ever met him. The name is
Yeah,
familiar though.
Ron used to be my neighbor. He quit first. He went to work for Nakamura Kawabata. He was the project engineer for the federal building that was under construction. And after 2 years, the project finished and they really didn't have a position for him. So they wanted him back. He was working for public works, I don't know what, uh, in Schofield. So he went back thinking that at least he has a job. So they gave him back his same job. And then 6 months later, he quit again. I said, "What happened?" He says, "I didn't realize why I left." So he did well. He's retired now. We still see each other because he's moved from Mililani. But I remember him telling me 3 years after, we used to get together for block parties, and he said, now that he got his druthers in, he was partnered with Masuda, the MK engineers. Anyway, He said they can give me a GS-45 and I'd never go back.
Interesting. It's interesting how life, you know, just the influences. Yeah. I mean, if your high school teacher hadn't kind of pulled you aside and pushed you on to do
Yeah, I mean, it's
more than you thought. Huh?
yeah. Another thing is, I've been a Christian now for almost 50 years. And I tell my wife, God had his hand all the way through my life, even before I became a believer. And I said, what happens if my counselor didn't pull me in that day? What if John Burgess didn't pull me into his office, that day to encourage me to go to graduate school? And I look at all I call them miracles. People call it just luck. But I mean, our journey, if you get a chance to talk with Robert, I mean, he can tell you a whole lot of other stories that happened that, just happened because we just would not quit. We just keep going.
Yeah. I didn't think I'd make it this long in consulting, to tell you the truth. I made it too. But yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I look at my life now, I said, oh man, I'm just so blessed. And you put in about the God factor. I believe that too. But just how the twists and turns. And sometimes you think this is the worst thing that could ever happen to you. But sometimes it turns out into the best blessing ever.
It is. It does. And he puts you through the trials and through the fire so that you come out stronger, right? You have grandkids, kids married. What? How many children do you
I have one. My son he's in Hilo, so I have a 4-year-old grandson.
What does he do? He's an engineer.
He's a lawyer.
Better yet.
He wouldn't make a good engineer, because he's more of a people person. So
a lawyer. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So yeah, I enjoy the grandkids now, the grandson.
You see him often?
Yeah. Every couple months, but I'd like to see him more. But he's just a joy.
See, the other thing that was a really bad turn for me, and I saw both of my kids, the rule my wife and I made, that you graduate from high school, you're not staying here. You're gonna go to the mainland. You're either gonna go to college, go to junior college, go to a trade school, go into the service, but you're not staying home. So my son went off first. He's 49, and he went to Midpack. Midpack wanted to be it's a real artsy school. They push the arts and theater and dancing and all that kind of stuff. And my son was a gifted art guy. He could draw and that kind of stuff. So, Mark Suzuki?
Yeah.
Mark's wife was my son James's counselor from the 7th grade all the way through the senior year. That day, the counselor follows the class. And so she recommended that James go to a small school instead of a big school. Like Midpack is a small school, and he'd do well better. So he should do something like he's good in arts. And I said, no. I said, you're not going to. I want my kids off my payroll. So, well, what about graphics? And I said, well, that's close. And he says, or he can go into architecture. I said, okay, we'll take that. So I told him, I said, you'll be an architect. So he kind of enjoyed it. I was showing him, they do buildings, that kind of stuff. So he interviewed at Woodbury University. They had an architecture program, small school, really small school, like 200 students. And he finished in the 5-year program. He got his baccalaureate degree in architecture. And he really liked doing it because he was put on as a junior architect for the restoration of downtown LA. So anyway, after that, he wants to go into industrial design, which I had no idea what it was. Industry design is an architect for everything that's not buildings. Hair brushes, automobile fenders, car upholsteries, furniture, shoes, whatever. So through his advisor, he got into Pratt in Brooklyn. Got his industrial design degree. And now I gotta, the logistics of moving your kids around. Like, where did your son go to school here?
No, he went to uh he went to St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland.
Oh,
It's a
and
small college.
the logistics of moving,
Oh,
it
just
gets
to
to be a
get
pain.
airplane stuff. He had to like sleep over in the airport just to catch an early flight. Hey, John, you froze again. Can you hear me? You're still frozen.
You still there?
Yeah, no, came
Okay.
back.
So then I gotta worry about moving him back to LA because he stayed in LA, you know, for 2 years before he went off to industrial design. And so these two Asian, one Korean, one Chinese guy was designing. They were they were a subsidiary of this skateboard shoe company, Lakai. That was the high end, like the top end skateboard shoes in LA. And he was at an expo down at the convention center, and he saw those two guys, and they asked him about his resume and that kind of stuff. And so they offered him a job. They'll pay his moving expenses. Take the job, at least get you back to LA. So he came back and he was designing skateboard shoes. And then just by luck, 2 years later, Nike comes down and offers him a job. And so he's been with Nike now for 22 years. He lives in Portland.
Oh,
He started their skateboard shoe line, and he built it up, the share market to a sizable strength. And then they took him into golf, and then now he's finally where he wanted to be, is with Air Jordan. He's got 3 grandkids, and my daughter she went to Oregon State. Target stores picked her up in her senior year, put her through the management training program in Tualatin, and then she worked for Target for 2 years. She didn't like retail. So she was floating around working for BB, doing sales, commission. She's a people person. So then I told her, I said, look, you got to get something more substantive. You can't be floating around doing all this kind of stuff you like doing. So I asked my carrier distributor in Las Vegas if they would hire, because she moved to Vegas. That's where she got married. Would hire her, as a counter person, because I felt like carrier need the more retail experience when you come into our wholesale stores. So because she had a degree, they put her into commercial sales, and that's where she got her background in commercial equipment and sales. And she was doing that for 5 years. And so when they got the recession in 2009, she was the last to get cut off. So she said, well, we're going to come home. And at that time, my second grandson was born. My first one was born. Both of them were born in Vegas. So they come home. My grandson is 3 months, and the other one is 3 years old. And I got to grow up with them. I mean, spend time with them, pick them up if they finish early. Because now my daughter's my overhead, right? I cannot tell her, oh, you can take time off. I'm gonna take care of the grandsons, and on my own, without my wife. We had so much moments together, and this is why I say spend time with your grandchildren. You can mentor them the way we're supposed to raise our kids. Because when we're raising our kids, we're working, right?
Yeah.
And it was just the most fulfilling thing that I can share with older people, is spend time with your children. Do it the right way. So both of them are in Punahou now. My older grandson is a senior, is going to graduate this year, and my younger one is in the 9th grade. Both heavily into soccer. One's JV,
Oh,
one's varsity.
your son must live up in Hillsboro, right? In Oregon. That's where the Nike headquarters
Beaverton,
is.
the
Oh,
headquarters.
Beaverton.
It's
Okay.
like
My
about a
my
20-minute.
daughter
Yeah.
my daughter's over there. She's in Portland from there.
Oh, you have
Hillsboro.
you have a son and a daughter.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
She lives
Nice
there.
place. Yeah, she lives there. She's a nice place. She's lived there about 6, 7 years now. Yeah.
She's not an
Beautiful.
attorney too. Attorney.
No, no, she's a English professor.
English professor. All
They
right.
correct
Where
our
at?
English.
Where at?
She works for Portland Community College up in Rock Creek.
Ah, ah.
But yeah, they both of us correct our English all
Oh
the
yeah.
time.
In fact, in our whole family, I'm the only one talking pidgin English.
Well, you went to Roosevelt when it was still English
Yeah.
standard, right?
No, it got off. It was ASHRAE when I got there.
Oh, great. Hey, John, thanks for this time.
Okay.
Just so insightful. It's so great to talk to you. It's
Thanks.
great. Maybe I'll see you around Mililani walking around sometime. I remember you used
Where do
to
you live?
run.
Yeah.
I live by
Where
the
do you live?
skateboard park by H2. You know where the skateboard park is?
The
Uh,
skateboard, the inline
yeah.
skate,
Well, it's the hockey skate
inline hockey. You
by
live in
16 acres.
you live in a gated.
No. That's where Governor Cayetano used to live.
Right.
No, I'm before that.
Okay.
On
It's
the
a
road
nice
before
area.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I gave up running for 10 years now. I'm walking now. Same distance, but takes a longer.
Oh, good.
Stay healthy. That's all you got to
Yeah.
tell you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.